When most people think of societal collapse, I think what they think is, no more electricity, there's no Wi Fi, we're back to horse and buggy. But that's not necessarily the case. And I learned that after listening to this podcast from this researcher who was trying to figure out how to clean a lake system that had just been overrun with plankton. So, what I learned from this researcher feels like a metaphor for current day civilization. So hang with me. Okay, so this researcher was tasked with cleaning a lake, like I said, that was overrun and completely nasty and dirty. And we've all seen those lakes where it's like the algae is taking over. You can't even see to the bottom of it. It looks so nasty and muddy. So that's the kind of system it was. There was, I believe, phytoplankton was the specific plankton that had taken over. And what they discovered was the fish that are in the lake, they, in order to eat, need to bury into the bed of the lake, which then muddies up the water. All the dirt just kind of like floats up into the water, and therefore that's how it gets muddy looking. And there's no light that's able to shine through the water anymore because of all the dirt and debris that's just floating around in there. So as a result, you're able to just have the phytoplankton just live unchecked, and it just has this domino effect on the lake's ecosystem. So the researchers, trying to figure out the best solution, decided, let's just take out the fish and see what that does. So taking out the fish actually proved to be the solution, and here's why. So once the fish were removed, the researchers learned that they weren't muddying up the water anymore. Surprise, surprise. And light was able to shine through, which means that aquatic vegetation was able to grow on the bed of the lake. And the aquatic vegetation allowed zooplankton to be released into the lake and clean it. So the zooplankton started to clean the lake, and balance was restored to the lake. So then the researchers were like, okay, let's reintroduce the fish to see what happens. And surprise, surprise, even after reintroducing the fish, the researchers found that the lake remained clean, that the ecosystem was still in balance. And that to them was pretty shocking. So for me, I spent a few minutes before bed last night just trying to figure out what represented what in our current day society. Like, who would be our zooplankton? Who would be the light? Who would be the fish? Who would be the phytoplankton in the beginning that was running rampant? And I think I have a good idea of who the main characters are in this story. I decided that the aquatic vegetation in this story would represent the middle class, because the middle class really is the backbone of our society. And when I say our, I'm kind of talking about the US. So it's the backbone of our current society. And without it, it really creates all this imbalance. Now, it's not the sole reason that everything, it's not like the actual main character, but without it, you just won't have balance, because other things won't be able to come in and clean stuff up and keep things in check if you don't have the middle class there with their voices heard and their representation. The light. I think the light is the people's voice. Without the light shining through, it just feels like we're in an apocalyptic movie where, you've got the elite running rampant, doing what they want. And you just have poverty, you have, unequal distribution of wealth. It just seems like without the people being represented, again, that check and balance just isn't there at all. Okay, and for the fish, government. Because the fish aren't necessarily the villain in this story. However, they do seem to ruffle things up, and muddy up the water, because they are supposed to be a representation or an extension of the, aquatic vegetation of, the middle class, and even the people's voice. They could only exist if the light is shining through. So without the light, they wouldn't, the entire lake system just doesn't make sense. Nothing really can survive without light, and it muddies up the waters. Okay. And I don't know, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, maybe the government's not the fish. And then last, the zooplankton regulation. So remember, the zooplankton came in and they regulated and ate up all the nasty stuff. They cleaned up the entire lake. So for us having regulation prevents the imbalance of the other plankton that we had, which I believe is the elite and wealthy. Because when they go unchecked, I mean, just look at how the scales just always tip in their favor. And when the bad plankton go unchecked, they have such a big effect on the fish, and they have, they drown out the people's voice, which the government can also do. They can block out the people's voice by, again, muddying up the waters, and preventing the people's voice from shining through. And the elite and wealthy have influence over this government, and they also are preventing the light from shining through, and they prevent the zooplankton from coming in and cleaning because there's just way too many of the bad plankton. And obviously there's no aquatic vegetation when you have way too many bad plankton. So again, this is what I thought. I stayed up last night thinking about this. Let me know what you think. If you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, if you think I'm crazy, I'll also accept that, because I co-sign that. But anyway, in either case, all this to say that societal collapse isn't necessarily like we're going back to, before the war. It's essentially the current systems that rule society just break down. So, think about like the Egyptian Empire. There's still people living in Egypt, guys. It's not like Egypt no longer exists. It's just their governmental system looks completely different. Now, what this researcher did say is that he found that, because he used the lake study to study, societal collapses, because the lake is a closed system, et cetera, et cetera. So what he found is that societies were less likely to collapse when they had more of like a republic, a democratic system where the people's voice did matter and helped shape their society. But the societies where they had just like one figurehead at the top and where the elite, are taken over, those usually collapse. And there's two things that really tend to catapult a society into collapse. One being climate events, like big climate events, like take, for example, Pompeii, like they were wiped out. That was societal collapse, game over. And then you can do about that. So that's an example of one, or like, let's just say there's no more water in a certain society. They have to get up and leave so that, collapse is their way of life. So that's one. The second one is when you have unchecked elite, you've just got a complete huge gap in the wealth classes, and meaning the wealth class has most of the resources. So kind of sounds like what we're in today. We're kind of checking off the boxes for both. So just thought I'd let y'all know.